credit to Joe Rogan, he pushed back on a few things, but in general, he allowed Mel Gibson to express his beliefs without mocking them or denigrating them or anything like that. There was no apology on Gibson's part about believing the resurrection.
I felt like Mel Gibson's response sort of solidified that idea in Rogan's mind, and then he gets into the Sedevacantism arguments, and he talks about the election of John the 23rd in 1950.
Gibson probably does not accept as valid any of the popes after Pius XII. He probably doesn't feel any need to defend somebody like Benedict because he doesn't think he's even the pope.
But what did you think of Joe Rogan taking the Lord's name in vain frequently throughout the interview? And Mel didn't bat an eye at that.
I would think that if I was told Hollywood was making a movie about the battle of good versus evil, about the fallen angels, about hell and things like that, I would say that's going to be a 100% disaster unless one man makes it.
Yeah.
And that's Mel Gibson. He's done more to evangelize the world than probably anybody on earth just because of the passion of the Christ.
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Hey, I don't know if you watched the interview with Joe Rogan last week. Here's a little clip of it.
And people do feel free to beat up on it.
Mm-hmm.
Even I do when I see it's like, when it's not fair or when I
Right.
think it's off.
Right.
Like, when they appoint some cardinal in some diocese and he's been covering up for like people who are child molesters.
Yes.
Or, like Theodore McCarrick or Cardinal
Mhm.
Wuerl or those kind of guys. I mean.
Or the Pope.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm
Benedict.
Oh, not Benny. Well, he was covering up, but like,
Yeah.
so is the guy now.
So I'll put a link to it in the show notes for you if you want to watch the whole thing, if you haven't done so already. But joining us now to discuss this is the editor-in-chief of Crisis Magazine. Crisismagazine.com is the website. Eric Sammons, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. I am so glad to see you back in the saddle. We were all praying for you, and it's very good to see you. Take it easy, though. Take it easy, man.
You sound like my wife. Stop it. We're going to be fine. Everything's going to be good. Praise be to God. Thank you for praying. I do appreciate that. I feel like it's a wee bit day late and a dollar short now. The Joe Rogan thing was so last week. It feels like forever ago, the news cycle, but it had a huge impact. Like, it seemed like everyone was talking about this. It seemed like a big deal. Did you think it was a big deal?
I did, and I know that's just the news cycle we're in now, that things go away pretty quickly, something else replaces it, and I understand that happens. But I do think we should stop and reflect that this was a major event, I think, Mel Gibson's interview with Joe Rogan, because, first of all, Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast in the world, and he has an audience that is unique, but also I think it is open to the message of Catholicism. And I think in many ways, in some ways not so much, but in many ways, Mel Gibson did a very good job of presenting that message of Catholicism in a way that his audience would reflect on and would consider much better than perhaps a lot of people like myself or somebody like that who might give a more formal defense of the faith.
Yeah. There were so many aspects to the interview that I found intriguing and interesting. And I guess and I want to get into some of the specifics and get your take on it, but just in general, I felt like Mel's tactic here was to be as general as possible, to not get caught in the weeds in these conversations, but just sort of like play nonchalant, meet Joe Rogan where he's at, be relatable to Joe Rogan, not to feel like some overly pious Catholic, Sedevacantist, but really just kind of be relatable and conversational, and then just plant little tiny seeds. That was my take of what I thought Mel Gibson was trying to accomplish. Do you think that's fair?
I think it's very fair. In fact, I remember St. Jose Maria Escriva, he wrote about when you're sharing the faith, it needs to talk about the faith. It needs to be very natural. He didn't like this idea of having some formal way of doing it, but instead it should be as natural as we talk about a hobby, a sport, or something else that interests you, because that usually is what resonates the best with other people, because they realize you're just talking about something that interests you, something that's important to you. And that's how I felt like Mel Gibson was doing, was he's simply saying, this is what I believe. This is what I think about these things. And I'm just going to share that with you. He wasn't even like, sometimes when you come across like you're trying to convert somebody, that backfires greatly because people they feel cornered. They feel pressured. Mel Gibson wasn't doing that. He was simply just saying, here's what I believe. And the things he stated, we have to remember how radical they sound to the average person. They don't sound that radical to us. But the idea that the resurrection really happened, that he really believes a man was in the grave and came out 3 days later, that's radical. The fact that he just said, no, I don't believe in evolution, that's radical. These things are radical in today's world. He said in this very nonchalant way, but because it's Mel Gibson, it gives a certain weight to it. And people are like, oh, wait a minute. So this guy who's like been the pinnacle of our culture, he can just simply believe these things and it's okay. And credit to Joe Rogan, he pushed back on a few things, but in general, he allowed Mel Gibson to express his beliefs without mocking them or denigrating them or anything like that.
You know, you posted a great example yesterday on your X feed. I'm going to put it on the screen for our viewers on video, but there was this Protestant guy who gets dressed up in a costume it's a bathrobe and a fake mitre, and he's got a bucket and he's going around pretending to, you know, the asparagus may where they go around blessing people with the I can't remember what that wand is called. I forget. My kids would know. They'd probably slap me for forgetting the name of it. But anyway, you know, I looked at that as a former Protestant, just to emphasize your point. It is completely foreign to them. The things we do seem so crazy that it really is hard to get them to understand. You know, and there 3,000 people were brought into the church when St. Peter preached after the tongues of fire in the upper room. How do you think he got 3,000 people? Do you think that the Jews let him just take them to the pool of Shalom and just baptize them? You think he marched them down to the Jordan River miles and miles and miles away? Or do you think he pulled out holy water and he blessed them? He sprinkled them? I mean, it's so foreign of a concept to these people that they just can't wrap their heads around the pomp, the circumstance, the liturgies, the rituals, the vestments, and the smells and the bells. It's hard work being a Catholic, trying to convince people of the truth, isn't it?
It is. And I think the more natural we share the faith. I mean, I don't even like to use that phrase that much because it sounds very Protestant, but also it sounds very forced and informal. I mean, and formal, but really I've said this for many years. I've been involved in evangelization for many years. 95% of evangelization is just simply your personal witness. I mean, St. Paul was the first example of this. How often did he mention he was a Pharisee? He persecuted the faithful and things like that because he's telling his story. And that's what Mel Gibson's doing. And Mel Gibson has a very compelling story. And he's not, I mean, by his own admission, he's not always all the way there either. Right. I mean, he's very flawed. He's still very flawed. But yet, his story resonates with a lot of people in our culture today. And so when they see, okay, here's this guy who's got all these problems, all these flaws, yet he's saying, I do believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I do believe in what the church teaches. I do believe that God created us. And that was his main thing when he was talking about evolution, was he's just simply saying there is a creator. There is somebody who ordered all these things. And he didn't want to get into, like you said, he didn't want to get into details about it. He's like, he even said, I don't know all the details about this. Right. I just simply know that God created us. And I think that's a very powerful thing that goes a lot farther, because when we're in our Catholic bubble, our Catholic world, we tend to get very detail oriented on a lot of this stuff. And that's fine. I mean, I'm the first one to do it. But at the same time, when we're talking to the wider culture, the more important thing is that we live out our faith, but that we just kind of tell people, this is what I believe. And we're not embarrassed by it. That was the great thing, is there was no apology on Gibson's part about believing the resurrection. He wasn't like, I know this is crazy. I know some people don't think this. He just said, no, I believe it. I really do believe he rose from the dead. So I think that those are examples we can take from the Gibson interview and use for ourselves.
One of the things that I was kind of put off by, I mean, I guess there was a couple, but one of them was, I felt like he allowed Joe Rogan to denigrate Holy Mother Church and sort of live there. Like Joe Rogan said, it's a dark institution, and Joe Rogan believes that it's corrupted. And I felt like Mel Gibson's response sort of solidified that idea in Rogan's mind. And then he gets into the Sedevacantism arguments, and he talks about the election of John the 23rd in 1958, which I don't personally adhere to that theory. I'm not a Sedevacantist. I think things don't add up in that theory personally. But nonetheless, I felt like if he's doing apologetics, even if subtly, he's allowing Joe to think that the church is corrupted, even though Mel did specify that, it was founded by Christ and has been infiltrated. Do you see what I'm saying? Did you feel that as well?
It was definitely by far the weakest part of his of the discussion on Gibson's part, because here's the balance. I mean, he does say instituted by Christ, and he does point to the men in the church as the problem, not the institution, but he does it very weakly. And also, I mean, here's the balance we have to have as Catholics, particularly in today's world and in some place like Rogan. Rogan and his audience, they're very skeptical of institutions. A lot of people are today. They don't trust institutions, the government, the church, or whatever the case may be. And there's reasons they don't. There's good reasons they don't. And so you have this balance of saying, yes, there's a lot to criticize about the men who run the Catholic Church today. There's been a lot of evil that has been allowed to proliferate. I mean, his example of McCarrick and Worrell are perfect examples of that. So I totally think it's fine and good, in fact, for Gibson to be the first to say, yes, these are terrible things. But Rogan clearly sees the Catholic Church as an institution, as an evil institution. And there should have been more pushback about that. There should have been more willingness to say, well, hold on a second. Let's separate some actions of some evil men with the institution. Let's look at the history of the institution, see all the good it has done, all the saints it has produced, and let's have a more balanced view than Rogan has. So I definitely thought that was weak. I also thought he should defended Benedict a little bit more, because what Rogan said about Benedict was just outlandishly false. And not that, I mean, Benedict does have in his past, as when he was bishop in Germany, he did move somebody around, but he made it sound like an abuser around, but he made it sound like Benedict was like knowingly intentional. Exactly. And like, I think because Gibson probably does not accept as valid any of the popes after Pius XII. He probably doesn't feel any need to defend somebody like Benedict because he doesn't think he's even the pope. Although I'll be honest, I don't think Gibson's ever explicitly said, I don't believe they're pope. But anyway, he kind of implies it.
He does.
So I think that was another place that was weak. He should have been a little more being willing to say, call out Rogan for that, the inaccuracies about Benedict and about the institution itself in its history.
I loved that he kind of blows Rogan's mind a wee bit in some places about like Pachamama and other things. I just liked that reaction that watching Joe Rogan go, what do you, like, even Joe Rogan knows that if you are the Pope, you should not be saying all religions arrive at God. Like, even Joe Rogan can figure that out. So like, what does that mean for the rest of us Catholics who are kind of giving him a pass on that? We shouldn't be giving him a pass on that. And we're up against a break here. And it just reminds me, we should be the first in line to call out the wolves in sheep's clothing and anything that is evil and wrong within the body of Christ. We should be the first to do that, not the last. We shouldn't allow our Protestant brothers and sisters to do it, our atheists or whomever else to be the ones calling this out. It should be us. That responsibility lies on us, which is why I do what I do and what we do here at the Station of the Cross. This is part of our mission because we feel obligated to be the first in line to say this is wrong and it should be called out. Let the cockroaches scramble because they don't own the kitchen. The light is coming on. That light is Christ. I wanted to get your take on Mel's, his body language, his behavior. He's been pretty dodgy, cagey now for a number of years. I asked a buddy of mine who is a Hollywood screenwriter what he makes of that. He watched this as well, and I said, "What do you think? What does his body language tell you?" He says, "Listen, the guy's been broken for decades, just alcoholism and rough life, rough living, and it's just this is a part of that." But he didn't really make great eye contact with Joe Rogan very often. He seemed cagey at times. What did you think?
Yeah, I think what your friend said is true. If you go back to even old interviews of Mel Gibson from the 80s and 90s, it's a similar manic energy he has. And he's always had that. I think it's what allows him to do what he does, create these great works of art. I think he just has this energy that just he's been either blessed or cursed with, depending on how you want to look at it. And I think also then he's had physical, I mean, he talks about him in the interview, a lot of his physical issues, some brain damage, some, different things he's had. And I think it just comes out here. I don't think it necessarily reflects anything like spiritual necessarily. I think it's more just a physical thing where he just is unable to sit still. In fact, he even made a joke about, like, I think in his last interview, he was fidgeting with a pen all the time, like a pen, and just kept on going, hitting it and stuff like that. And he didn't have that with him this time. And so I just think that's his natural state of being. I think, honestly, if you were sitting down with him, just two friends relaxing with him, I think he'd be doing that even then. So I don't necessarily think it means anything more than just the fact that he's a broken man in a lot of ways, and I think it comes out in these when you actually talk to him directly.
We have a straw poll going over on the YouTube feed. How did Mel Gibson do in his Rogan interview? 32% say great, 48% say mostly great, a few issues, 16% say just okay, and 4% say terrible. So everybody's in sort of that middle of the road category, or the bulk of people are in the middle of the road category there, which I find interesting. But what did you think of Joe Rogan taking the Lord's name in vain frequently throughout the interview? And Mel didn't bat an eye at that.
This is a tough one. Obviously, anytime you take the Lord's name in vain, it's awful. It's a sin. It should never be done. But it's so common in today's world. It's a tough nut to crack as far as letting it be known that this should not be done, especially to somebody who does not believe. Obviously, if you hear a believer take the Lord's name in vain, that's something you should call out. Should Mel Gibson have called it out during the interview? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, because when you are in a situation like that, you have to make choices. You have to decide what is the overriding concern here. What do I want to focus on? And I might have to allow certain things. In fact, like him allowing Rogan to go against Pope Benedict might just be a simple case of, okay, I can choose my battles here. I can't address anything. If he comes across and he says, like on the show, Joe, you can't take the Lord's name in vain, he brings it up a lot, I think there's a decent chance he loses the audience overall. They just look at him as a schoolmarm. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just simply saying that's the reality. And I think when we're talking to people who are very far from the faith, who live in a culture that is not just post-Christian, but anti-Christian, we have to make prudent decisions on what do we call out, what do we not, what do we work towards. Like the big questions first, the big issues first, the resurrection, things like that. And then over time, if you develop a relationship with somebody like a Joe Rogan, then I think you move on to things like taking the Lord's name in vain. I don't want it to sound like I'm diminishing how awful that is. I'm just saying we got to choose our battles when we have so many sins and evils around us. We can't combat them all at the same time.
I would have loved to see, especially a guy who admits he's not part of the post-conciliar church, going into a Sedevacantism and then trying to explain that to Joe Rogan. It's like, it's almost comedic, right? Like Joe hasn't the slightest clue about any of these things.
Nobody else does either.
Blowing his mind, it's like, it was kind of funny to watch. But like, it would have been neat if every time Joe Rogan takes the Lord's name in vain, Mel dipped his head in reverence to the holy name of Jesus. Like he could have done that, and then Rogan would have been like, "Hey, why do you bow your head every time I say the name of Jesus?" And he could have said, "Oh, that's because every head shall bow and every knee shall bend." He is the King of Kings. He would have had a wonderful opportunity in a positive way to explain why we reverence that name without being condescending or overly pious or whatever. It would have been a wonderful opportunity. I feel like it was a missed opportunity. But I guess to me, the fact that I didn't see Mel flench not a single time at that gave me my pause. Like
the fact is,
I would have been uncomfortable.
So much. Yeah.
I might have failed to have the composure. I might have failed to meet the moment where it's at and didn't say the right thing. But I think I would have squirmed or something. I didn't see him squirm. That gave me pause. I love. There were so many things about the conversation that I felt interesting. The Apocalypto conversation. It was one of my favorite Mel Gibson films. Was Apocalypto. I'm angry at him for not making the second one, but he got robbed in the commercial part of that, so he never got to follow that up. I was told it was supposed to be a three-parter, so that was a tragedy. What did you think about his conversation on the resurrection? It seemed confusing a bit to me on where that's going. What did you think?
You mean on the movie?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. Well, first of all, it blew my mind because, like you said, it sounds like it's going to be a wild ride because he talks about it's basically talking about the good versus evil, going back to the fall of man, the fallen angels, things like that. And I've said this a couple times, but I've said I would think that if I was told Hollywood was making a movie about the battle of good versus evil, about the fallen angels, about hell and things like that, I would say that's going to be a 100% disaster unless one man makes it.
Yeah.
And that's Mel Gibson. He's the only person on earth, I think, who could potentially pull it off, either theologically be a disaster or artistically be a disaster. That's what Hollywood would produce. But Mel Gibson, I think, can pull it off. He might not, but he is possible he could. So it sounds to me, though, like he might be biting off more than he can chew, because he's talking about the fall of man, going back to the good and evil, and he's also talking about all the way to the death of the last apostle. And I think there's been talk about it includes like the 3 days that our Lord is in Hades. Right. And so there's all of this going on. I mean, again, only one person could potentially pull it off, and that's Mel Gibson. So I'm praying that he does, because we both, I mean, I told this some priest who was on X tisking Mel Gibson, of saying good things about Mel Gibson because he's such a bad example. I'm like, he's done more to evangelize the world than probably anybody on earth just because of the Passion of the Christ.
Right.
That movie was one of those powerful evangelistic films ever produced, probably maybe the most, and he did it, and it wouldn't happen without him. So I'm praying that he does pull it off. It comes, but it sounds a lot more wild than I expected. I thought it was just going to be, you show Jesus somehow, maybe a little bit in Hades, he rises from the dead, and then you show the apostles how they reacted to that. Now, clearly that sounds like it's going to be in it, but it sounds like it's going to be a heck of a lot more. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, it sounds like it's written, so it's not like he's just making this up. He's got a script. So,
well, what's interesting about that, and that music means we're out of time, is that my screenwriter buddy, he thinks he doesn't actually have a completed script. He thinks he probably has some sort of draft or something. But to use terms like psychedelic trip and all of that, it's his speculation that they still don't have a workable script, and they're still working on that because it's not clear in his own mind. He's got the general broad strokes, but he doesn't have the details. So it's a huge gamble for Mel, in my opinion. Well, I guess we'll have to wait to see how it goes.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.